Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And this is an odd episode. This is going to be on for a couple of reasons. Number one, because we were going to tape it Thursday night, and things got a little crazy, as in apartments tried to burn down and all that because of laptop cords. So instead, what we have is a special interview with Arif and our special guest, Trevor Sikkema. He will be on, and they will be discussing for a very long time the Bucs and the Vikings game. So please check that out. It's a really great episode. Also, afterwards, Dusty decides to join us for a little bit of mailbag, and then we are out. So again, this is a bit of an odd episode, but this was recorded before we had a chance to be told by the Vikings that Sam Bradford will not be playing. So this was taped beforehand. Now you know. We did not know during the interview. So all of that aside, this is a great interview. Please check out Trevor Sikkema. He can be found at Tampa Bay Trey. He also works as a beat writer for Pewter Report at pewterreport.com. He's great. This is a really cool episode. Thank you so much for checking us out, even though it's a little late on a Friday. Thanks so much. And here's Arif and Trevor.
So Trevor, how's it going?
It's going good, man. How are you guys?
I'm good. So I got a couple of questions about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the first question I really have is, why has Case Keenum looked so good against the Bucs?
Dude, I have no idea. And trust me, like, the players know it too, because when we got open locker room, the first opportunity that we had to talk to the players, you know, the Sam Bradford news had already been out that he was up in the air to play. And we asked Gerald McCoy specifically, we're like, hey, you know, like, Case Keenum, he's had the Bucs, and like right like in the middle of the question, he interrupts and is like, we know, trust me, we know. And I don't know if that's because like the media has kept asking him, or if like the coaches keep hammering in their head or something, but like they are well aware that Case Keenum is apparently the Buccaneer killer.
So how do you feel about that?
I mean, like, I guess they're aware of it, and I guess, like, they can't, I guess there's going to be no surprises. Like, they're going to study Case Keenum harder than probably anybody has studied him since college. They're basically going to know all of his tendencies, you know, probably his bedtime routine, you know, what kind of toothpaste he uses. They're basically going to know everything they possibly can about Case Keenum, because they're not going to let it be three in a row if they can help it.
All right, well, okay, so, you know, obviously that part of the matchup matters a lot, but
Sure.
I am really curious about just sort of the Bucs defense in general. I picked up Levante David in a keeper league a while ago. He's actually been kind of disappointing since then. I want to know why. I assume it has a lot to do with Quan Alexander, but I also assume there's something involving the defensive scheme that's limiting my guy, Levante David, from racking up the tackle. So could you describe the scheme in a little bit and what that means for both David and Alexander?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure when you picked him up, but I assumed it was just sometime last year, because David had some really good years when he was younger. And then last year, which was the first year under Mike Smith's defense, it was kind of a combination for David. And I'll just start there and I'll kind of get to a broader sense of the defense. But for David, I think the reason why he had a down year last year is because, one, it was Mike Smith's first year as defensive coordinator. And if you remember who were the head coaches for the Bucs previously, it was Lovie Smith and Greg Schiano, who were god-awful. And so their defenses were – there just was not the right communication there. There was not the right roles going on between each position. And Levante played great because Levante is a good linebacker, but – last year was the first year that they really changed up how they communicate in the defense, different kinds of roles they have. And I think with Mike Smith's defense is, I mean, it's good to know this in all kinds of defenses, but you really have to know what the guy next to you is doing. And so Quan coming up also diminished Levante's play, because he was much more of a tackling machine than they thought. But this year, year two of Mike Smith's defense, and the big thing that we were told during the offseason and training camp is that they are leaps and bounds ahead of what they were doing last year, that they weren't starting at ground zero anymore. You know, they're starting right where they left off. They're only getting better with communication and things like that. So for the linebackers, it's key. The communication is a big deal, and I think Alexander and David are now really just intertwined in the things that they get to do, and that's why they played so well together, when they were on the field during training camp and in the preseason, and then obviously that first series with the Browns or with the Bears before Alexander gets hurt. And so communication is just such a big deal in Smith's defense and what he has his linebackers do, because they do play out of nickel a lot, and there's a lot of just 2 linebacker set. Like, even if there's 3 linebackers on the field, most of the time that third linebacker is going to be close to the line of scrimmage. So it's basically like, even if they're working at a base, Levante and Alexander are basically operating as the only 2 linebackers. And now that they've had a full year to kind of, understand what the other person's doing, understand what the defensive line's doing in the secondary, it's been a lot better so far.
Someone mentioned to me that this might be the best 3 starting linebackers in the NFL. And Kendall Beckwith has played, really well. And so there's some merit to the claim. I think there's another team in the NFC South that might disagree. But just generally speaking, like among, sort of groups of linebackers around the league, maybe we could include the Vikings with that if Anthony Barr continues to play well. Where would you say you put this Tampa Bay Buccaneers linebacker core?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're only 1 game into getting to see how Kendall Beckwith is playing. And let me tell you, I was one of Beckwith's harsher critics when he was coming out of LSU. When they traded up at the bottom of the 3rd round to get him, I was kind of like, you really just traded up in the 3rd round to get a guy who's exclusively going to play Sam linebacker for you? And not only that, but his tape, he got bullied at the line of scrimmage and with blocks. And, that's what a Sam linebacker does. You put a Sam linebacker in to give you size and to be good near the line of scrimmage. And Beckwith was not that at LSU. And as training camp has gone on, we heard from the coaching staff, Beckwith's been doing great. He's been recovering great from that ACL. Got back after 8 or 9 months and was on the field already. So that was pretty big for him. But then, so here we are 1 game in, and he's now earned the starting Sam linebacker spot with Devontae Bond out. And those 3 played great. I mean, when you say one of the best in the NFL, I think that's, certainly a small sample size right now, but holy cow, the way that they played there, the merit is certainly there to be one of the best groups. And a lot of people thought that, David and Alexander had the potential to be one of the better duos. But boy, if Beckwith can play as well as he played in that first game, even half the time, then you're talking about getting a 3rd linebacker that gets you all kinds of production in certain weeks that you didn't think that you were going to get that from. So yeah, after 1 game, the hype is definitely real for this linebacker group. They are very talented and they're playing really good.
What's your sense of Beckwith based off of his preseason play? Do you think this level of play is going to be sustainable for most of the season based off of maybe what you saw in camp or the preseason?
See, that's an interesting question, because Beckwith has been able to flash because he's been getting a lot of time at middle linebacker, which he is better at.
Okay.
So when Alexander comes back, the reason why Beckwith played so well last week is because Alexander got hurt. He went out with a hamstring injury.
Mm-hmm.
Beckwith played that middle linebacker spot, so that allowed him to kind of fly all over the field. Now, I will say, he even did that better than I thought he was going to do, and he was, in fact, I guess, calling some plays, Mike Smith said at the end of the game, which is really cool for a rookie in his first game. But when he goes back to that same linebacker position, even Sunday against Minnesota, I wonder how it is going to work long term, because we really have not seen him play that same position that much. So, I wonder what's going to happen once he has to take on blocks more, once he has to go up against better offensive lines, better tight ends, because, even in the preseason, Beckwith, most of his playing time's coming in, garbage time with backup tight ends and backup O-lines and things like that. So I think that he is playing better in space than even I thought he was, but I do still have my doubts about how well he can be as a Sam linebacker, not only holding the point of attack, but also being a pass rusher. So we'll see if he surprises me fully and turns out to be a great Sam linebacker as well.
Yeah, well, that's fair. So there's a couple of injuries then worth talking about. So you mentioned the Quan Alexander injury. So he's listed as did not practice for both Wednesday and Thursday. The same is true for Chris Baker, who I believe is the starting nose tackle, correct?
Yes.
And then Gerald McCoy was limited in practice today, didn't practice, and we're recording this on Thursday, didn't practice on Wednesday. And then we've got, I believe, Brent Grimes is limited in practice. Do you think any of those players are not going to play in this game? And if they aren't, what do you anticipate sort of the impact of that being?
The only one I think has a chance of really not playing is Baker. I think Gerald McCoy's totally fine. He practiced today, and even though he might have been limited, like he was dancing around to music and jumping around and all that stuff. So he was listed as an ankle injury. Might have been one of those quote unquote veteran days, so you don't have to sit out on the floor to heat for an extra practice. Brent Grimes, obviously, I think they're just going to list Brent Grimes as questionable basically like all year because that laceration that he had on his leg, which I don't know if you've seen that, but it was weird.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
That was like
that was something.
So I think they might just milk that and basically put him as questionable like every single game. But he's going to play. I think McCoy's going to play. So if Baker does not, and I think Alexander's going to play. Although I will say Alexander has been really vocal on social media saying like, "Yo, I'm playing. Like I'm going to play on Sunday." And then every time we ask the coaches, like especially Dirk Cutter, we're like, "Hey, is Alexander going to play?" He just says, "Well, you can check the injury report when we get it out." And it's like that's not a yes or a no. So I will just say I think Alexander's going to play, but it was just weird how they handled that.
Yeah.
So if Baker doesn't play himself, Clinton McDonald will step in, and I gotta say Clinton McDonald is probably one of the better backup interior defensive linemen in the NFL at this point because he was a starter for the last couple of years for the Bucs, and he was totally fine. You know, he's not the best defensive tackle in the world, but he knows exactly how to play next to McCoy. He knows what to do. He knows how to do the dirty work, and he's even had, it seems, better energy this year. I don't know if it's because of the rotation or what. So he'll be the starter if Baker can't go.
So that's a pretty good defensive line. They put a lot of pressure on Mike Glennon, but to me, my read of this defensive line, Gerald McCoy aside, is that you've generally got a bunch of pretty good players, and then you've got a potential sort of Hall of Fame-ish type talent in Gerald McCoy. Do you feel a little bit concerned that against some of the better offensive lines, which obviously the Vikings are not, but against some of the better offensive lines in the league, that the three of those four could just generally be exploited?
Oh, totally. Yeah. In the preseason, well, I'll even go back farther than that. In the off season, we heard all this stuff about Noah Spence and how he lost weight. Like the dude looks ripped. He looks great. But then they were talking about other pass rushers and who they were going to get and this and that. And then preseason rolls around and the Bucs get like 0 pass rush for 4 straight games, and we're all kind of like even when the starters were in, and we're just like, okay, that's like not even the backups. Like the backups couldn't even get sacks, which is not good. And so now we're into the regular season. The Bears obviously couldn't hold them very well because I think Mike Smith did a good job of kind of mixing up where different pressures were coming from. And I think they have talented players, but they don't have great edges. And I wonder, there's been a ton of hype about Noah Spence because a lot of people loved him coming out of the draft, and it's only his second year in, so you still have that potential with him. But I'm not convinced that Noah Spence is a team's top edge rusher. Like I think he could be a great second edge rusher for a team, but I don't know if he has the bend that we think that he does for him to be this top pass rusher on the edge. And so if you're trying to make like an edge 2 guy your edge 1, then it's just going to kind of be downgraded naturally from there. And so the Bucs really don't have this other pass rusher outside on the other edge from Noah Spence. And so I just think they're relying too much on him, and I don't know if he can pick up the plate that they're putting down for him. Just because I don't know if he has this bend in this pass rush that everybody thinks that he does. Now, like, he's got a hell of a motor. Like he will work for a lot of sacks, and he will get plenty of effort sacks and even some tackles for loss, whatever. But in terms of being that like hiking the ball to the sack like timer kind of a guy, I don't know if that's him. And so yeah, if you ask me if they're gonna have a tough time getting to the passer from the edges, not from that Hall of Fame All Pro defensive tackle spot outside of him, then yeah, I do have my worries about that.
So, I mean, even to help the Bucs, I mean, they are lined up against what was previously maybe the worst offensive line, if not one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last year. They did pretty well against the Saints. They did pretty poorly in the following game.
Sure.
Based off of like your read of the Vikings offensive line, which admittedly it's a bunch of new players, so it's not like anyone, including the Vikings, are going to be super familiar with what their capabilities are. But based on what your read of the current offensive line is, how do you feel about the non-Gerald McCoy players being able to generate, a pass rush.
So yeah, I guess like I don't know a ton about them just because they're new, but like would you say the strength of the O-line is like elf line and like interior players, or is that not like do I have a bad read on that?
Strength is kind of a difficult
Okay.
word to use. So Riley Reif has been playing really well, and I would argue maybe he's probably the best player on the line. Elfline has played really well at moments, and he's had some big whiffs at other moments, and so he's kind of up and down, kind of what you expect for a rookie.
Sure.
I've not been a big fan of the left guard, Nick Easton. The right guard, Joe Berger, has been solid, but he's clearly a player in decline. And then Mike Remmers has been, well, he played better than I thought he would against the Saints, which was still actually quite poorly, and then did even worse in the next game.
I guess it's just then I guess if that's the thing, then I mean I would hope the Buccaneers line looks good again. They look good against the Bears, but like in terms of pressure. And they brought that up too. The coaches brought that up too. Like, oh, they didn't get the sacks, but there were tons of quarterback hurries and pressures. And like, I'm totally down with that. I get the disruption factor. Like, that's definitely a thing. But there does come a point to where sometimes you just need a guy to end a play, like by himself, something. And so far, we have not seen that from the Bucs, like at all, outside of Gerald McCoy, like you said. And so, if they're going up against a bottom half, even like bottom 10 offensive line in the NFL, we should see something better from the Bucs. And if we don't, then that's a little bit of I don't know if I call it a red flag, but maybe like a yellow flag that could turn into a red flag. That if like I knew, because it's game 2, I guess. But yeah, I'm wondering how much, I'm wondering how much Devontae Bond or Jaquiz Smith will play, if at all, this game, because neither played in the first game. They're both coming off injury. And at some point, one of them is going to have to come in and play opposite Noah Spence. Both of them are much more seasoned pass rushers than Noah Spence, so maybe that helps the whole thing, but who knows? I don't even know if they're going to play this week.
Yeah, that's fair. So the defensive line I always find kind of interesting for the Buccaneers, because I felt like just for a long time it's always been kind of just Gerald McCoy. And the linebacker core, I think, is really exciting because I think that you can maybe make up for a lot of stuff with a really good set of linebackers. But the secondary situation, it doesn't seem like, it's that resolved. Obviously, the Brent Grimes thing, he's questionable, but he's probably going to play. But it feels like the secondary overall is just really poor. I feel like Vernon Hargrave should be playing a lot better. I'm kind of worried about the slot situation. Chris Conte might be the worst safety in the league. But, you've got, was it TJ Ward back there too?
Yeah, he might not be a starter. They have Keith Tandy, who's normally the starter. I would assume that Keith Tandy and Chris Conte are still going to be the starters.
Sure. Well, then, so how do you assess the secondary situation, and then how would you put them up against people like Thielen and Diggs?
Okay, so the Bucs' secondary defense is they're sometimes a frustrating watch because they have, I don't know if I would call it the exact players that they want on the outsides, like with Hargraves and Grimes, but like the whole point of their defense, of Mike Smith's defense, is true. And I hate saying this phrase all the time, but like it's the bend but don't break thing.
It always feels meaningless to say, but there's something with it.
Right, because the corners play off coverage, the safeties basically play too deep, and that's just what it is. Like if we saw Chicago, if the Bucs would not have scored as many points as they did early on, that Chicago game could have gone way differently, because in the first 2 drives that Chicago had, Mike Glennon was just hitting the same slant pass, like close to the line of scrimmage, all the way down the field, down the entire field, and then he threw a pick, and then they punted, and then like Tariq Cohen fumbled the ball, and all of a sudden the Bucs are up 17, and you've got to run a completely different offense. You can't do that anymore. You can't be as methodical. So, like, if the game stays close, the Bucs secondary could totally hurt them because of the way that they play. They have these corners who are supposed to, like a Buccaneer, quote unquote, a Buccaneer corner is a smaller corner who has quick feet, good recovery speed, can tackle, but also they have to have this anticipation thing. They have to watch film. They have to know the quarterback they're playing. They have to know the offense they're playing, because that's the only way they get turnovers, is if they like anticipate a throw, if they see something before it actually happens. And you'll see that a bunch in the 2016 tape that they have. But like that kind of defense, because they play so far back and things like that, it allows all kinds of catches. So they're not trying to get beat deep, but like you can totally move the ball against this Bucs secondary. And I guess I'll just say that it makes players like Hargraves look worse than he is, but that's like, I don't know how much better it can get, if that makes sense, because the scheme's not going to change for them. And so, like for Thielen and Diggs, I guess it just depends how they run them, because I think those two guys are actually pretty good receivers. You know, I think they're good at what they do, and I obviously think Diggs is a deep threat receiver. I wonder how much deep stuff they're going to get against him, but like if they wanted underneath stuff, if both of those guys can be good route runners and be precise in what they do, you can get separation within 10 yards. You can get that almost all day long. So it really just depends on how the Vikings are going to play it out.
Do you think that there's like a pretty heavy reliance on, you mentioned that there's usually a cover 2 shell with those safeties. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a pretty heavy reliance on that? And do you think that they tend to get exploited by like, you know, slot corners or slot receivers or tight ends up the seam?
You know, they really don't. I guess like I'm trying to recall it right now, and that's, I think it's because David and Alexander are so good at what they do that if they drop back into coverage and if they help, they make that window between the linebacker level and the safety level so small that the only quarterback I can remember who really took shots in the seam was Drew Brees last year, and Brees even had one of them picked off because it was Alexander. He dropped back so well that he made the window so tight that he ended up getting a hand on it, and Vernon picked it off last year in Tampa Bay. So I guess like in theory you would think that might be a counter, but I really don't see a lot of it. And I guess off the top of my head, the linebackers have got to be the reason why, because they might be playing so well in coverage.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. You don't tend to see that many defenses anymore with a heavy cover 2 usage, except in sort of like 2-minute situations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Kind of curious that like the Bucs, which I guess makes the most sense in the world, would kind of carry on that tradition. Do you have any other thoughts about like a heavy reliance on a cover 2 shell?
I mean, just like I wonder how far this defense can take them. Not necessarily with the players, but so like we're in year 2 here in Mike Smith's defense. I said that before, and he got pretty creative in the first game, and now that they have Ward, I will say that Ward being like an X factor player who can guard like basically any tight end or a slot receiver or something and both be physical and fast, that's gonna, I think, really, really help them, because when the word was going around that Ward might be cut, you know, plenty of Bucs fans were like, hey, should the Bucs go after TJ Ward? And I was like, should they? Yes. Do I think they will? No, because TJ Ward as a player, like his role, both the roles that he made Pro Bowls with, like does not exist in Tampa Bay's defense. And so now that he is in Tampa Bay, they have to figure out a way to get that role out of him somehow, which is actually encouraging to me when you ask that question, because I wonder how effective this soft defense could be once you start to play real opponents. Because, I mean, Tampa got into a bunch of shootouts with Atlanta last year that, I mean, that offense could just move the ball down kind of at will with different ways that they were attacking that soft zone coverage. So, and like you said there aren't many teams that do it, and there especially aren't a lot of playoff teams that play as soft in coverage as the Bucs do. So I don't know if they're like protecting their corners, maybe protecting their safeties or something, but something somewhere in that defense has to get more aggressive than we've seen in the past if this defense wants to be a playoff defense once they start playing real teams. I will say that.
Fair enough. There's definitely a couple of those teams in the NFC South. So my question then on the other side of the offense, or on the other side of the ball then, is about how effective can this offense be? Because, you know, as strong as I think that, Jameis Winston is as a passer, as incredible as Mike Evans is, I've become intimately familiar with how much poor offensive line can hamstring an offense. It really feels like the Bucs are maybe in a similar situation, maybe DeMar Dotson aside. Like, it feels like the other four just, like, not good. And I'm a huge fan of Ali Marpet. I think he can play a lot better. But what do you think are sort of the capabilities of this offense, given the nature of that offensive line, and how do the Bucs just in general make up for it? Or am I wrong? Is that offensive line actually pretty good?
I think it's a little bit better than what you're saying, but I definitely the concerns are definitely there. I think the right side of the line is pretty good. You have DeMar Dotson as the right tackle. I think Marpet will do fine. I think he'll get things at the center position pretty well. And even like J.R. Sweezy playing right tackle, he's doing better than a lot of people thought. He's a very physical guy. He had a couple whiffs last week, but overall I thought he was fine. The left guard position is kind of weird because they have Kevin Pamphil, who they like, who's in a contract year, who we thought was just going to be he was the swing guy last year. He played guard and tackle as a backup role. And so when this left guard position opened up, we're like, oh, it's going to be Kevin Pamphil. And last week they split time between Pamphil and Evan Smith at left guard, and we didn't really know why. And then obviously Donovan Smith is left tackle. He's getting better every year, but how good is better? You know what I'm saying? If he's going up against Griffin or Hunter, it could be a long day for him.
Right.
I don't know. We don't really know. So, they're doing different things. Having two tight ends will help. Certainly, I guess if the offensive line's not going great, because O.J. Howard is a phenomenal blocker.
Right.
So, they're big fans of 12 personnel, and they're going to put that out there plenty. So they're gonna help whichever side is really struggling. I think O.J. Howard's going to be the main piece there, and so I think that's kind of maybe how you remedy it, or even getting those guys obviously involved in the passing game. But like you said, there's only so much you can mask up for an offensive line. Either they play well or they don't. And Jameis Winston, as much as he is a momentum passer, if he can't get it going with a poor offensive line, then that's not going to be great.
Jameis sometimes, to me, feels like Eli, where his play under pressure doesn't drop too significantly, but he's always going to be a turnover-prone, touchdown-prone quarterback. I know that's not a new comparison or anything like that. I'm sure you've heard that a ton of times. But given that, do you think that kind of also helps mitigate some of the issues, especially when you've got a receiver like Mike Evans, where you don't have to be all that accurate, and so pressure may not matter as much? Sure.
I mean, Winston can make these stupid plays that you don't know how he makes it, and those are the ones that you fall in love with. And then all of a sudden you have these other plays where, last week, Charles Sims is wide open on a wheel route and he just overthrows him by 5 yards for a touchdown. And it's dude, you had a perfect pocket, the guy's wide open, it's 35 yards down the field, and you just straight overthrew him. It's, and what you said there, some Bucs fans have a difficult time realizing this, because it even goes back to Florida State. Basically the only outlier year he's ever had is his Heisman year when he was at Florida State, where he threw 40 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. And every year since then, the following year at Florida State and then his 2 years in the NFL, like you said, it's high variant. You're getting touchdowns, but you're also getting interceptions. And so when you're getting both of those, that also means that you're getting crazy completions where he's throwing it in the tightest of windows, and you're also getting these weird, inaccurate passes. So, having Mike Evans helps. I think having Cameron Brate last year for sure helped. He was a very underrated part of Winston's success last year that I think a lot of people overlooked, and having him is still good. But I guess, there's only so much you can do. At the end of the day, we can analyze this all we want, but Winston has the narrative that he does for a reason, and because this is the quarterback that he showed us he is for the past 5 years. And he gets over it or he doesn't, and it's almost like a week by week thing here. So like last week, for example, he didn't make any mistakes. He was fine. He was in control most of the time, but he missed when he should have hit, the big ones, the home run ones, those next step year 3 Jameis Winston throws that you wanted him to hit last week. He didn't hit. So it's like a week by week thing with Jameis.
Sort of philosophically, I know a lot of Twitter really loves these high variance quarterbacks, and 5 years ago, the very same group of people loved the more consistent, your Peyton Manning's, Tom Brady's, Matt Ryan's, and now Twitter's give me Brett Favre on every play or whatever. Where do you stand on this? Where you've got these high variance Eli Manning's, Jameis Winston's, Brett Favre's versus the sort of low variance. I'm not going to, maybe equally as talented, who knows, but more consistent quarterbacks say Sam Bradford. Where do you stand? What kind of quarterback do you want?
I mean, if you ask me, I would rather bet on a guy that somehow has the ceiling to get the team deep in the playoffs. And so, like, if you're looking at these guys that are super, like, like Alex Smith, for example. I mean, like, minus him being a god in week 1.
Right.
Alex Smith has been a guy who has just been, this quarterback that you have asked of him. He has command of the offense. He's pretty efficient most of the time, but the Chiefs have had a good defense. They haven't had the best offensive talent. I get that too. They've had a good defense, but like they just can't. You will never think of the Chiefs as a threat to win a Super Bowl with Alex Smith. And with Jameis, there is this. There's things that he's got to get better at. But if he does, and we've seen flashes of it, there's always this but with quarterbacks. And so I guess, if you're going to put me in one camp, I'm definitely of the camp where give me the guy that's got the, yeah, but if he puts it all together kind of a thing. Don't get me wrong, they are tough to find and they are tough to manage. But especially for this Bucs team, with as much offensive talent as probably the franchise has literally ever had, you have to have a guy with a ceiling who can make stuff happen. So
it's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, no, it has been an offensive barren franchise since the 70s.
All right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of exciting players in this offense. I mean, you and I were both big fans of O.J. Howard coming out and lands on the Bucs, who already had a productive tight end in Cameron Brate. But besides those two, you've got, like I said, Mike Evans. You've got Deshaun Jackson. Soon you'll have Doug Martin. And you've got Jameis Winston. But the defense they're lining up against is pretty good this week. You've got Harrison Smith, Xavier Rhodes. You're familiar with that defensive line with Everson Griffin, Daniil Hunter, yes. Brian Robinson backing him up, Linval Joseph, who, in my opinion, best nose tackle in the league.
He's very good. He's very good.
And then, of course, you've got Kendricks and Barr. Kendricks is maybe a little bit more consistent, but there's a lot of defensive talent there. Out of all of those guys, who worries you the most? Who do you think has the best ability to disrupt the offensive game plan?
Oh, well, I mean, it's got to be those front seven players. A lot of guys that you name there, just because as we talked about earlier, the offensive line is that's a big question mark for the Bucs. They have the pieces basically everywhere else. They don't have Doug Martin back, but they have Jacquizz Rodgers can get the job done. He's a guy that can. He's not going to have all these explosive plays just because that's not in his nature. But if he's a dude who's getting you 3.5, 4.5 yards per carry, something in between there, that's totally fine for an offense that's going to be more pass based or more wanting to get the ball through the air. And so I've got to say that it's probably that front seven and getting pressure. And people were kind of worried about that with the Bears, and the Bucs O-line was kind of up to the challenge. But I don't get me wrong, I do think the Vikings are a different level. I think in the preseason when we were doing our predictions, I had the Bucs losing this game because of that reason, because I trusted the Vikings defense a lot more. But I'd be interesting to bounce a question off you of who's going to guard Deshaun Jackson? Like, is it going to be Trey Waynes?
Yeah, it's going to be Trey Waynes, and I think part of that is because the Mike Evans Xavier Rhodes matchup is like purpose built from heaven.
Yes.
Like, I think both of them want to play each other because both of them, their strengths and weaknesses just kind of match each other.
Yep.
Xavier Rhodes has done a really good job against those kinds of receivers in the past. Kelvin Benjamin being sort of the proto example, he's also done a good job against like Calvin Johnson, who is not any other type of receiver, but you know what I mean, big and physical.
Sure.
Also, fast and quick and a good route runner. A lot of things.
Everything.
But yeah,
wide receiver is what you're saying.
Yeah, right. But he's done well against like Brandon Marshall and on occasion Alshon Jeffrey and stuff like that. And so those seem to be the kind of mold of receiver that he does well against. Mike Evans, of course, I think in the shadow of Odell Beckham in terms of receiving talent, so he's not getting maybe the credit that he deserves as like a top 7, top 5 receiver, but he's certainly, from a talent perspective, up there. What do you think of that matchup, first of all? And then second, we can talk a little bit more about the Trey Waynes Deshaun Jackson thing, because I want to push that discussion back as much as I can.
No, I like we're all looking forward to it. I was on one of the Tampa radio stations the other day, and I was saying, exactly what you just said there. It's strength versus strength, and they're going to I'm not sure how much help they like to give Xavier Rhodes, because I know he's a physical kind of cornerback. And so I will say that in 2016, when the Bucs went up against the Bears, they basically double teamed or double shadowed Evans every single time the offense got in the red zone. and they really basically allowed for nothing to go to Evans. This year, Bucs get into the red zone. They single cover him one time. He scores a touchdown. So that's like that matchup is going to be very intriguing to me, just because I wonder, and maybe you know more than I. Like, I just wonder how much help they are going to give Xavier Rhodes if not. Because if they're not going to give him help, I will tell you this: Mike Evans is going to get a crap ton of targets, because anytime Winston sees Evans one-on-one, he's almost always the primary wide receiver. So especially anytime the Bucs get within the 20, anytime in the red zone, Evans is going to get his looks. And I just like, do they help Rhodes much, or do they kind of leave him out on an island?
It kind of depends on the game. The Vikings have been very versatile in the way that they organize their defenses. I think in this game, because they're worried about probably Trey Waynes and then therefore also Deshaun Jackson, they're going to concentrate help between the 20s on whichever side of the field Deshaun Jackson is on. And then once we get into the red zone, I think that there's going to be more attention given to Mike Evans and more stuff over the top, so that you can have, Rhodes and Sendejo or Rhodes and Smith up top on Mike Evans. But I think that that'll be situational. I think the down and distance will help determine it too.
Sure.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if for most of the game you're kind of seeing a Darrelle Revis type game plan. Not that Rhodes is Revis or anything, but you'll have 10 versus 10 on one side of the field, and then Rhodes and Evans will probably battle it out. And maybe they'll let Rhodes fail. Maybe, Evans will overcome it. Maybe they'll, do whatever. But if they can mitigate Evans with Rhodes alone, then you have the capability of playing a smaller field.
This Bucs offense, I realize this, and I think I'm going to say this every single week. It's almost like a pick your poison thing. You will have to have single coverage somewhere on this Bucs team. There simply aren't enough defenders to help. Whether it's you're giving help over the top with Deshaun Jackson, whether you're double teaming somebody with Mike Evans, whether you're giving safety and linebacker help with O.J. Howard or Cam Braid, or even Adam Humphries as a slot receiver, something like you cannot cover all of these guys, and that was obviously the reason why the Bucs wanted to bring all these weapons in, is because ideally that's what they wanted to have. They wanted to be able to be versatile and almost be a defensive coordinator's nightmare every single week. And so that's good. That's going to be the fun, I guess, interesting part for me as this season goes on, is that every single week I'm going to get to watch how a defense decides to play this Buccaneers offense, because here we are, we're 1 week in, and whatever the Bears didn't work. So here we are on to the next week, and we're going to see what works and what doesn't against this Bucs offense.
So what do you think of the how effective do you think that Xavier Rhodes will be in the matchup against Mike Evans? Because you're right, I think on this side of things in Minnesota, we're also pretty excited about that matchup.
Just from my perspective, I think it's going to be Evans' advantage, because I think year 3 for Evans, or year 4 for Evans now, he is basically the best version of of a prospect that he has been yet. And so if that is in that tier 1 of wide receivers in the NFL, then he's got the capability to go off whenever he wants. The only guy that I've really even seen stop Mike Evans over the last year is Mike Evans. It's like if he loses focus, or he lets a ball go through his hands, or something, he is too big, too long, and too fast. Like, you just can't. It's the Calvin Johnson thing, and I'm not saying it's Calvin Johnson, but it's the same. It's the same theory, you just at some point you've just got to go, I don't know what to do. I can't keep up with this guy. I can't match his length. Because when you think about football and when you think about wide receiver cornerback play, the wide receiver knows where he's going and where the ball is going to be. The corner doesn't. When you think about it like that, how difficult of a job is it for a cornerback? Then throw in somebody like Julio Jones or Mike Evans or AJ Green, who's the guy catching the ball. So I think that Xavier Rhodes, it's going to be a fun matchup, because it's going to be one of the more physical ones that Evans has to deal with. But I will say, last year too, Sherman tried to get physical with Evans when they played Seattle, and Evans got the best of him in the end zone. So he even beat Sherman at his own game, getting physical with Sherman before he caught that touchdown. So it's definitely not a weakness of his game, and it's just something that we're going to have to wait and watch and see, because I think it's going to be one of the more physical matchups that he plays. We're just going to see how he has to adapt to it.
So Evans over the last 3 years has been averaging 82 yards a game. In the last game, he got 93 yards. If it's a largely one-on-one matchup until you get to the red zone with Xavier Rhodes and Mike Evans, how many do you think he goes over that 82-yard mark?
Yes, I think that he does. Barring maybe like if Deshaun Jackson ends up connected on like 2 bomb passes or something, I think that it's a 90 to 120 yard game for Mike Evans at some point, because I just think, and I could be wrong here, but just the way that I saw them operate in the preseason, and the way that I listened to Winston and Evans talk about the connection that they have, it makes me think that literally anytime there's one-on-one coverage, it doesn't matter who is guarding him, Winston's going to look his way. So if that's the case, if they're going to play a coverage kind of like that where Rhodes is almost on an island, I have to think that Evans is probably getting double-digit targets. So like even if an offense that is as diverse as the Bucs offense can be, if you're one-on-oneing Mike Evans, I think he's getting double-digit targets. And if that's the case, 6, 8 catches, and who knows how long they're going to be. We would see what the route would be, but I think that him getting over that average is well in play.
I find that kind of interesting. Antonio Brown only got 62 yards in a game where Xavier Rhodes was kind of injured for most of it, or not most of it, for a lot of it, and only got 3 catches against Xavier Rhodes in one-on-one coverage. Michael Thomas only got 45 yards. A lot of teams, we saw, Odell Beckham got almost completely shut down. Kelvin Benjamin got 0 yards. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just kind of curious because wide receiver ones, so wide receiver twos tend to do pretty well against the Vikings. That's like a Trey Waynes problem. But the wide receiver ones tend to get 50 to 75% of their average yardage. Do you think that, and a lot of times it's, Xavier Rhodes is kind of being left alone. Do you think it's just the fact of single coverage that just makes Mike Evans such a tantalizing, outlier to this strategy? Because I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that there has to be something interesting there for that to be the case where he would get more. Do you think it's just because most teams would double team him, and in this case he would be single teamed for most of the game, and therefore he can just beat single coverage? Do you think that would be the reason he would be an outlier to that overall trend?
Yeah, no, mentality-wise, for sure. And again, that's just because I just the way that Winston has talked about it, and even the offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, has kind of talked about it, is Mike saw single coverage, like we said, or like I said before, Mike saw single coverage one time against the Bears in the red zone. It was a touchdown, So, and even when he ended up getting single coverage as a play developed a different time, Winston again went back to him, and it went off of his hands. It should have been Evans' second touchdown of the game, but that is the reason that I would say. It's just that I don't think this Buccaneers team is going to be very used to Evans ever getting single coverage. So I think every time they see that, they're gonna. And Jameis too. He's a guy who super believes in his guys. Sometimes it's even maybe to a fault, but if he sees Evans in one-on-one coverage, I have to think that he's going to target him a ton. So I think just sheer targets and mentality that those two are going to have gives him the chance to kind of break that streak over. So, like you said, some good receivers that you named that they've been able to shut down those wide receiver ones. So.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, I think that's going to be the most interesting matchup to watch in the game. Going to talk a little bit about Deshaun Jackson a little bit, but I'm just so interested in O.J. Howard that I want to get to that real quick. But Trey Waynes, Deshaun Jackson. Trey Waynes plays a lot of off coverage, usually to a fault, but he has 4.31 speed. Did a really good job in college of shutting down deep receivers. A lot of those deep receivers, by their very nature, came from the Big Ten, and they usually weren't Ohio State Big Ten. They were like Penn State without Allen Robinson Big Ten. And so, his ability to shut down, deep threats was noted, but, maybe some questions came with it. He has been kind of a disappointment, I think, in Minnesota thus far. Had a pretty poor game against Tommy Lee Lewis, had a pretty poor game against Ted Ginn, had a pretty poor game in particular against Martavis Bryant. But if he can, if he has the opportunity to really only focus on the deep ball, I do believe that he has the ability to kind of shut those down, so long as you've got someone else maybe buzzing the flats for him. In that scenario where you've got people bailing to the flats to let's ignore like tight ends and slot receivers for a second. People like bailing to the flats and allowing him to really play, a cover 3 style of corner. Do you think that he has the ability to cover Deshaun Jackson? Just period.
I'm gonna say no, and that's because I think Deshaun Jackson is such a savvy route runner. I think that he recognizes where soft zones are going to be. I think he recognizes what coverage are going to be. He's going to go deep plenty, obviously. And if Waynes can cover him deep, like if the game plan is, hey, Waynes, just cover him deep. Like we will take things short. We're going to hope that Xavier Rhodes shuts down Mike Evans, and that's just going to be our game plan. Like if you can hit short passes to Deshaun Jackson and the tight ends do some stuff, okay, fine. You beat us, there you go. But even if you were just shutting down Deshaun Jackson's deep threat, I think that he is so quick in turning his body around, getting his feet down, operating in small spaces. And again, just being savvy with his routes and finding that open space. He has shown, especially in the preseason, he just showed a knack for something like that. And so that's why, even if they give Trey Waynes that, hey, just don't get beat deep, Deshaun's still I think Deshaun could possibly, have 8 catches if you're doing that. Like if you are only covering him deep and you're playing way off of him, I think Deshaun's got a 6-8 catch day coming. So for that reason, I say all that just to say Deshaun Jackson is not just a deep threat receiver. He really is a complete receiver.
Devin Smith, man, I really thought he was going to turn into Deshaun Jackson. Just thinking about Ohio State. Okay. So Deshaun Jackson's been kind of billed as one of those guys, and that's how he was used a lot in Philly. But he was also used a lot both in Philly and in Washington as a guy that can take advantage of those soft zones. But just in general, in order to take advantage of those soft zones, in order to really take advantage of what a defense is providing, you've got to have an offense that adjusts post-snap. I think that's maybe the best way to be able to take advantage of that kind of stuff. Does Dirk Cutter's offense do that? Does it create a lot of option routes, or is it typically, we've got an answer on one side of the field, we got an answer on the other side of the field, and whatever happens post snap, there's going to be one side of the field that'll have it covered. How is this offense designed? Are there a lot of option plays? Is it modular? Does it tend to be a little bit, sort of plug and play? What's the deal?
I actually don't think that there's many option routes, and I could be way wrong because obviously I don't have the playbook, but there are not many of these throws where it's okay, he could have been running this route, that's why the ball went there, and it was just a miscommunication. There's really not a lot of that. It's kind of just they're running the routes that they know they need to run, and it's just about hitting them. There was one example in the Bears game where Winston just completely overthrew Chris Godwin, and Winston threw it in the end zone, and Chris Godwin was clearly just running it like a long in route over just straight over the middle. And I kind of thought in my head, I was like, was that an option route? But it was kind of way off for it to be an option route. It was either he was going in or it was a post. But I'm just gonna be honest, I don't see a lot of that. I don't really see a lot of option stuff. I think they do a decent job of when plays break down.
Right. I
think they do a good job of making sure they rotate towards wherever Winston is going. They do a good job of that, but in terms of play design, kind of option with wide receivers, I don't think there's a lot of that, and I think that's because I just don't think they don't want to confuse Winston. So in any way, I think that they are saying hey, we're gonna call the right plays to get guys open. You just hit them. And so I think it's more of that philosophy than hey, let's run on the fly, have more chemistry. I know where you're going to go, even though it's an option route kind of a thing. I don't see a lot of that with the Bucs offense, but I could be way wrong, and they could just be really good at running option plays, and that's because I did, so I see it.
So Deshaun Jackson between 2014 and 2016, 68 yards a game. Like I mentioned, Mike Evans about 82 yards a game. Who is more likely to hit the over on that, given sort of the game plan that I am speculating about but just described to you?
Yeah. Deshaun. I think Deshaun is. Yeah.
All right. God, I'm so worried about Deshaun Jackson. What were your thoughts on Trey Waynes coming out of there? Because I know that you cover the draft pretty extensively, so you've gotten a lot of exposure to a lot of the young guys that are on the Vikings defense. What were your thoughts on Trey Waynes coming out?
I mean, it was kind of the same thing. I didn't think he would struggle this much still, but I mean, he was basically just a guy who was supposed to shut down speed receivers. But let's face it, I mean, if your only option in a scenario again where a wide receiver knows where the ball is going and what his route is going to be, and the cornerback does not, when you are asked, hey, every week, hey, you're going to cover this 4-3 wide receiver. And you don't know where he's going, so you just got to figure it out. I know you're fast too, so you'll get it. It's just like that. It's like a death wish. You know what I'm saying?
So you'll get it. I love that.
Like it's just, you know what I'm saying? Like it's So Wayne's coming out. I just obviously hell of an athlete. I thought he was pretty good when he could use the boundary to his advantage, especially when he could turn his back and get guys going down the field. He could go stride for stride with people, but in college, it's so much more simple. Like you figure, like it's not nearly as deceptive. In the NFL, there's all kinds of things going here. There's routes in the middle that are fooling you going one way, and then all of a sudden, if you're one step late in the NFL, you pay. So I didn't think that he would struggle as much as he has, but he really is just purely a speed guy. And I think maybe this is something that I'm noticing is that if you are a speed corner who is there to shut down speed receivers, your day is going to be tough no matter what. So that was kind of my thoughts on Trey Waynes. So
O.J. Howard in the Chicago game, 1 reception, 3 targets. He wasn't used a lot as a receiver in Alabama. We both really liked, as far as I can remember, maybe I'm just projecting onto you, but I think we both really liked his receiving capability, especially the dirty deeds he did in the Senior Bowl. And in Senior Bowl practices, I thought he was underrated as a receiver coming out. Kind of surprised, but not unpleasantly so, that the Bucs ended up drafting him because I like Cameron Brate. Like you said, they like 12 personnel a lot, so they'll have both tight ends on the field. But it sounds like, for the most part, O.J. Howard is kind of reprising a blocking-heavy role. Do you think that they'll ever sort of unleash him as a receiver? Do you think this is maybe a good game for that? What do you think about his usage in this offense?
No, totally. And so, just a little story tidbit, from people that were around there. I can't remember who ended up telling me this story, but, the general manager, Jason Light, the entire Bucs coaching staff, Dirk Cutter included, was at the Senior Bowl. And they were, I think, like 3/4 of the way through the first practice at the Senior Bowl. And Dirk Cutter just stood up, looks at Jason and said, yeah, I got my number 1 guy, and just like walked off to go get a drink or something. And it was
it had to be. He won the Senior Bowl.
Right, and he had watched 40 minutes basically of O.J. Howard in person, and he went, yep, that's him. And so crazy enough the Bucs end up getting him, but it's and people tried to. I'll just say that people tried to ask me this about fantasy football. They're like, O.J. Howard, man, he's this like incredible athlete. We saw what the Bucs did with Cameron Brate last year. They're just going to put him right in that position, and he's going to get even double-digit touchdowns this year. And I was telling, that's not going to happen. It's just not. Cam Brate is still going to run those Cam Brate routes and plays and have that kind of chemistry with Jameis. And so, to your question, are they going to open it up for him? Yes, they will. But it's not going to be in the sense that other people think, where it's like, okay, if O.J. Howard has a good game here, it's like he has arrived. Like, he is their guy. They're going to play him as the main tight end. They're going to go to him all the time. Like, O.J. might I'm going to say this, and people might freak out or be mad, but O.J.'s usage in the Bucs with the Bucs early on is going to look a lot like his usage at Alabama for different reasons, but he's going to be used as a blocker big time, sometimes as a decoy, and then other times he's going to have big games where he's just the mismatch god, wherever he is on the field, and they're going to get him the ball. But, then there might be a couple games where that's just not the case and he doesn't get the ball. So, to answer your question, they're going to open it up for him. But it's, like I said, it's just not going to be in the traditional way that you might see, where it's like if he has a good game, it's like, oh, okay, now he's tight end 1.
Right.
I don't think that's ever going to be the case, at least early on. Obviously, they think that Howard can fulfill all of their tight end dreams, but I'm just talking about this year. And
right, I mean, because Cameron Brate, I think he had 8 touchdowns last year, right? You don't just take those off the board, right? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that makes sense. So there's a good chance that based off of just athletic disposition alone, that you'd probably want Anthony, and it's probably going to change by, strength of formation, side of the field, hashes, etc. But they're probably going to want Anthony Barr and O.J. Howard. They're probably going to want Eric Kendricks on Cameron Brate. If possible, maybe in nickel situations or whatever. I don't know in what situation you'd have 2 tight ends and you've got nickel linebackers out there, but I don't know, maybe. Maybe that could be the case. Ben Gideon is probably not the best matchup for Cameron Brate, but that's maybe who you'd put there anyway in that situation.
Yeah, not great.
And then, of course, you're left with the question of kind of what's happening with the running back. Maybe bring Harrison Smith down for Cameron Brate. What do you think about these matchups for these tight ends? Like, I'm pretty confident that the Vikings would want Barr on Howard, but, I don't know. What do you think about these tight ends, and what do you think that means for the receiving capability of the running backs?
Yeah, no, again, you get into this situation where on paper you look at the Bucs and you're looking at teams that they're going to face, and you go, okay, well, if they go 12 personnel, then your best coverage linebacker probably has to cover Cameron Brate still. Then all of a sudden, your second best coverage linebacker is lined up against an athletic freak in O.J. Howard, and then you're somehow in a situation where, like, if you have, let's just say it's Charles Sims, because he's the better receiving back and can make people miss an open space. Then all of a sudden, like, your third best linebacker is covering another really good pass catching weapon out of the backfield. So, like, the Bucs and how they match up with different teams, like on paper, going back to it, it's like a pick your poison kind of a thing, and it's almost like the perfect storm for them. So it really just it's going to be about, because then, like, if you get even farther into it, you go, okay, well, then maybe a safety can come down and help in a certain area. Okay, well, then who's going to go over the top with Deshaun Jackson if he goes over the top? And then, or on the flip side, like, okay, if a safety comes down, that means that they can't be helping Mike Evans with Xavier Rhodes or so. So there's all of these, cause and effect kinds of things with coverages, to where if your linebackers cannot cover tight ends, you're in trouble. And so, Kendricks is obviously good. Barr, I thought was more of like a pass rushing type of linebacker. Is he not, or is he more of a true linebacker?
He's more of a true linebacker. Yeah.
Okay.
He was actually pretty astounding in 2015 in all of his responsibilities: pass rush, run defense, coverage, and last year took a huge dip in all of those, but in coverage the most. And so this year, it seems like, and obviously we're only 2 games, it seems like he's kind of somewhere in between, but he's still playing primarily coverage role, or like traditional linebacker roles, and so he'll drop into coverage a lot. He doesn't blitz a ton. He still blitzes more than almost every other 4-3 standard linebacker, because, duh, but it's still it's still a lot less than like a rush linebacker for sure. Yeah.
Okay. No, and OJ got the first target of the game last week, and so you look at the stat sheet and it's like, oh, well, he only got 3 targets and got 1 catch. Okay, but the first target was the very first target of the game. They ran him out on a linebacker, and the only reason that he didn't get the catch for basically 15, 20 yards, maybe even more, is because Danny Trevathan, the linebacker, made the best play of the day and time to jump to bat it away and blah blah blah. So, you tell me that Barr is a little bit better in coverage than I thought. Makes it a little bit better of a matchup for the Vikings, but they're going to play in 12 personnel plenty. And the thing is that with O.J. Howard being such a good blocker, the linebackers truly have to be ready for anything. They have to be able to cover. They have to be able to backpedal quickly, cover the tight ends well, and everything like that. And so that's another interesting matchup that's going to be one to watch for in the game, is how well they can target that middle of the field, and even how much they can thin out the linebackers if they're sending the tight ends, out towards the sideline and all that kind of, because then at that point you're getting quick routes with Jackson in soft coverage, and then you've got the middle of the field cleared up because the tight ends are gone and all this kinds of stuff. So you got to be able to cover pretty well against this Bucs team. You really do.
There's a ton of offensive weapons. Why only 2 offensive touchdowns against the Bears?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? If you can answer that, You can be offensive coordinator. How about that? That was the thing in the preseason too. The Bucs and the Giants. Okay, so if the Buccaneers did not throw that late game touchdown in the fourth game where Sefo Lufau somehow made a good pass in the NFL to Bernard Reedy in the corner of the end zone, the Bucs would have literally been the only team in the NFL without a passing touchdown in the entire preseason if you take that away. And so this stuff doesn't just magically go away. And I tried to tell Bucs fans this, same thing with the pass rush. It's like, they're like, oh, the starters aren't playing, they got plenty of time. It's not the preseason. It doesn't matter. I'm like, the process of what you are watching still matters, folks. So this is a problem during the preseason, finishing in the red zone, hitting on their big plays. And here we are last week, they could not finish some of their red zone drills, and they couldn't hit some of their deep passes. So this is something that has lingered into the regular season. And I mean, I got to tell you, it's not the play calling. It's not. The guys are plenty open, both down the field when they call deep shots and in the red zone. They just haven't made it happen. And we can sit here, as Tampa media people and say all we want, like, oh, it's going to happen. And trust me, the process – and what I'm seeing is telling me that this is going to turn around at some point because they're calling good plays, the guys are getting open, and Jameis is seeing most of the time. But it has yet to happen. So who knows? We'll see.
So Nick Folk kicks a 40-plus yard field goal and a 50-plus yard field goal, makes it. He is a below 50% 50-plus yard field goal guy for his career. Just barely, I think. Oh, no, actually, I just checked. Just a little above. Look at that. Do you think that he can relying on that for offense? Because he has 3 field goals in the game. One of them is kind of a gimme, and then 2 of them aren't. One's like for most NFL kickers like a 70%er, and another one's like a 50%er. Is that like an issue where 9 of your points have to come from kicks? Is it an issue that Jameis Winston only averaged like under 7 yards an attempt? Do you think that's like part of it? That like, hey, Jameis is a little bit volatile, and you've got this offensive line that's going to keep creating pressure. Is that really the best way to solve this Bucs offensive attack?
Are you saying just like kicking field goals?
Yeah, like limiting the Bucs to field goals. I'm not confident that Nick Folk, because he's 100%, right? I'm not confident that he'll continue being 100% as a kicker. I mean, he was available for a reason.
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, like keeping the Bucs, trust me, like I will have my doubts forever, like about like every Bucs kicker until I stop covering the team, just because of Roberto Aguayo. Right, it could be a totally different guy, and I will think that the second the ball leaves this guy's foot, that it could be a terrible kick.
Just like a Vikings fan. Wow, this is great.
I won't say his name. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna say that guy's name on this podcast. I'm a guest here.
You love Kai Forbath. I don't know what you're talking about.
So, I mean, simple math. Obviously, 3 is great. 3 and 6. 3 is the lesser number. You want to hold teams to field goals. But, I mean, that's definitely the goal, especially because they have a kicker who will, no matter what, there will always be this thing in the back of their head of he could miss it. And so when you do that, that's obviously going to help you out a lot. If you can put the game on Nick Folk's foot more than you can allow it to be on Jameis Winston's arm, you have a better chance of beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. No question.
Do you think that this is like sort of a explosive is one word, but I think we'll go back to the word volatile offense, where some weeks it feels like they'll only score like 10, and some weeks it feels like they'll score 50. Sometimes it doesn't even matter how good the defense they're up against is. Like, just some weeks is just gonna be a fantastic. Like, do you like that's the impression I'm getting from this interview?
Yes, the Buccaneers offense. I mean, just because it's Winston, maybe it'll get a little bit more balanced and stable when Martin comes back. So we'll have to see then, but. Jameis Winston's a momentum quarterback. And, a perfect example of that, the 1-minute drill last week against Chicago, where they ended up getting in field goal range from, I think, like their own 20 or 25 or something like that. They had one timeout, minute and 4 left. Jameis, I think, hit all but one of his passes, maybe, and gets him into field goal range. But it's like, when you put Winston in situations like that where the first pass you get is complete, and then the next pass is complete. Well, then all of a sudden it's like that. It's like that NBA Jam thing where you're basically like getting on fire, like you're heating up, all this kind of like that's literally Jameis Winston. So because this was the narrative last year too. They were like, oh, he was so terrible at starting off games. I have no idea why. Nobody had any idea why. And so
sounds a lot like his last year Florida State too.
I mean, so last year, like midway through the year, here we are, the media people, and we're talking about, well, you got to get Jameis's feet wet at the beginning of the game. What? Are you serious? Like the first half of an NFL game is so damn important, and you think you have a franchise quarterback and you've got to baby him into like the game? Like that should not be a thing. And so, but I mean, like that's kind of who Winston is. He's just this momentum quarterback to where when he gets hot, this Bucs offense is extremely difficult to stop. In the preseason for almost, I think all but one or two drives that the first team offense played, they marched down the field methodically, like at will, could not be stopped. So that's a thing. This offense could be very unstoppable one week. They could be missing everything else the next week. Who knows? And like I said, when they get Doug Martin back, it might be a little bit different. They might have a little bit more room for error there, a little bit more, like time in between those lulls where they can still either generate points or yards or something to wait for that kind of momentum or Winston to get it going or something like that. But as of right now, without an explosive run game, yes, it is all on Winston's arm, and it's about him either getting momentum or not getting momentum.
What do you think about Doug Martin? Because it feels like every year is like a different Doug Martin, right? Because his rookie year, phenomenal. And the next 2 years, like whatever. 2015, weird stat, was second in the league, I think, in rushing yardage. And I think he made an all-pro team, which like that's just unusual to me. And then last year was kind of abysmal. Who is he? What are we going to see later on when he comes off of suspension? And I assume it's a 3-game, not a 3-week suspension. And so because of this, because everything's been pushed back.
Yes, okay. You're correct. He's got to serve 3 games. We debated the crap out of Doug Martin this offseason. And it was just like, we went through everything, his rookie year, how he did, how he was injured the next year, how he was an all-pro the next time he was healthy, how he was injured the next year. And then he had this substance abuse and all this stuff. And it's like, well, running backs aren't worth it. So just cut his contract now that it's not guaranteed. Draft a running. Like we went through every scenario. And I would tell you this, most of the Bucs media, us included, Pewter Report included, we thought the best move, because of how easily it is to, I guess, find running backs that have good success, even short-term success in the NFL. We thought it was to move on from Doug Martin. Mm-hmm. The team did not agree with that. Obviously, the team stood by him, watched him go through rehab, all this kinds of stuff. And I will just say that he is clearly the most talented back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, he looks focused, he looks better, he looks in shape. And so I think we are going to see, if he plays for the entire season, and that is in itself a game of roulette, because he has been hurt plenty of times, but if he is healthy, I think we're much closer to that, top 5, top 10 running back Doug Martin than we are something else. And so, plenty of Bucs fans are hoping that. We saw plenty of flashes of that in the preseason. We really did. And, a lot of people have asked me, is he the running back one when he comes back? My answer has always been yes, absolutely. He is, even if, Charles Sims might get, third down work here, blah, blah, blah. Doug Martin is still the guy.
All right. So when a lot of people were excited about Jeremy McNichols. He got cut. Mm-hmm. I know you told me, I think in a DM, don't get too excited about Jeremy McNichols, Arif, which credit to you.
Yeah.
Is it because is the only reason he was cut is because he's like not the smartest running back in the world?
It was definitely I think it was a combination of he could not get the playbook down. He could not understand what he was doing. And because of that, he had zero confidence, and you could just see in his run.
I see. Okay, so it kind of like built up.
Oh, yeah. he was running up to the line of scrimmage, like basically stutter stepping with both hands over the ball, like I can't fumble this, and like would gain no yards at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Like there was no confidence in his play. He just looked totally lost the whole time. And I don't, from Hard Knocks, so we learned the whole thing about like Snoop being like having a relationship with him and everything. And I don't know if he felt, I don't know, but like a little homesick or just like not comfortable in Tampa Bay either. There might have been a little bit of that involved with him, just kind of, he might have not liked his surrounding because the Bucs tried to get him on their practice squad and he opted to go to the 49ers. So I don't know. He was never comfortable in Tampa, whether it was in the playbook, whether it was in the city, whether it was when he had the ball in his hands. He was just never, ever comfortable.
Do you think being in San Francisco is going to be good for him?
I mean, I gotta say it'd be better in Tampa because it couldn't have been any worse than Tampa. So, yeah, I mean, he's a talented kid, but I have no idea at this point. At this point, it's all mental, and when you start getting into mentality with players, who knows? Who knows?
So, do you think that? I mean, it seems like it's going to be another talented running back class. I shouldn't even backpedal. I'm not going to hedge it. It's a good running back class.
Yes, it is.
It's like, oh, who knows? Is Royce Freeman going to be like? Are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to invest themselves in the running back class, kind of like they did with just how incredible this tight end class was? They were like, well, just get the best one. Like, are they going to do the same thing, or are they just going to continue? It probably is going to matter how Doug Martin plays, but your feeling as of now, are they going to dip into this running back class?
So I don't see them dipping early because I think if they're going to dip somewhere early, it's probably going to be in the trenches, either offense or defense. But yes, obviously how Doug Martin plays a big role into that. But I believe he's 29 next year, no matter what. I think.
Yeah, I think you're
that's
right.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he's 29 next year, no matter what. So you would think like, like it's time to get a running back anyways.
Sure.
You wait another year, you put him in the wings. Martin's 30 at that point, blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to say Peyton Barber, man, they like him. They like him a lot, and they continue to give him carries. And they gave him Peyton Barber ran Jeremy McNichols out of town, not on purpose. Like, not that he was a bad dude. Like,
get out of here, Jeremy.
Not like literally like a bandit or something, like a sheriff. But like Peyton Barber played well enough to basically for them to cut ties with their 5th round pick, who they really liked. And in the second half of the Bears game, Peyton Barber got more carries than any running back that wasn't Jacquizz Rodgers, and he did well with them. So they have been talking about Peyton Barber for the last 2 years, about how big he is and how fast he is for the size that he is. And so I don't know, man. Like, they might be grooming him to be this guy who comes along as next year, maybe when Jacquizz Rodgers is out, maybe when Charles Sims is out too, they will have to get a third running back, whether they draft one late, maybe, or a free agent or something. But the Bucs starting running backs next year could very well be Martin's number 1, Peyton Barber's number 2, somebody else's number 3. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Barber only had like 1 year in college, right?
He had very limited production. I don't remember exactly how much it is, but I know there was a situation with like his mom where he basically had to go get a check, like a game check to basically like provide for his mom or something.
And then I'm just so fascinated with the story because other people were fascinated with it. So I'm going to go back to it and then we're going to be basically done with the interview. But how does it happen that you draft a player that doesn't have the capability to grasp a playbook as much as you think? Like, because they don't invest a 5th round pick in him if they thought he's going to be so behind on the ball here. Like, they interview him, right? They talk to his coaches. Like, what happens?
Man, I mean,
and it happens to every team, but how?
I mean, like that's the scouting part that's so, I guess, so weird for like guys like us who, you can look at a guy's tape all you want. You can talk about how good he is, the potential he has. Like, after the 3rd week of the season where McNichols struggled again, like for the 3rd week in a row, that was after was it Jacksonville game? I can't remember, but I started to say, like, yo, McNichols does not have a guaranteed spot on this team. And people came after me, man. They were like, he's such a great route runner. He's a complete running back, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it doesn't matter if he can't learn what he needs to do. And I don't know, man. I don't really know how you – because, man, like, you and I would think that if a GM has the – like brings a guy in for a private visit or like interviews him at the combine or something, like you would be able to tell right off the bat, like if this guy had it, mentally, like if he's got like killer instinct that we're, but I don't know, man, like Jason Light's been a pretty dang good GM in terms of the draft. So, he's been a scouting director and a scout basically every stop he's been before he was general manager with the Bucs. And so like it's ain't his first rodeo. He's done this thing a lot. And so yet he's still missing personality-wise on a guy like Jeremy McNichols. So I don't know. I really don't know. That is one of the wild card parts of the draft, along with how coaches treat players and just scheme fit overall. That when you scout players, that's totally out of your hands. So I don't know, man. I really don't.
All right. So then, real quick. I know that you've got some particular fears with regards to special teams, but let's ignore the kicker situation for a second. Let's talk about the punter and the return game. Just super quick, what are your thoughts?
Okay. Brian Anger's the GOAT. Should be an active Hall of Famer if you ask me.
Ahead of Wilson for a reason.
Bernard Reedy's going to be the kick return, punt return guy for them. Adam Humphries did it last year. Or Adam Humphries at least did the punt return stuff last year, but they kept Reedy on the team as that fifth wide receiver, which is such a coveted spot going through training camp. And because they kept him there, they're going to give him both the opportunities. And he's a speedster. So, I mean, he's a guy who, if you give him a hole on special teams, he's going to break it loose. And so, I mean, like, I'd rather have dynamic guys on special teams than quote-unquote play it safe guys anyways.
Right.
So.
You prefer the get 40 or get 17 on a kick return than the get 25 guy every time? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm the same way, but when it happens, people get mad at Jerick McKinnon. Who knows? What do you think about the coverage units? The punt and kickoff coverage units.
So the Bucs, again, last year when Anger was achieving his transformation to becoming a physical GOAT, Josh Robinson, Ryan Smith.
Robinson. I don't care what anyone else says.
Dude, he's a special teams captain for the Bucs.
I knew it. And I hear he's a safety now, not a corner.
Yeah,
I was right about Josh Robinson. All right.
There you go. This is the Pump Arif's predictions pod. Text in the mail. So Josh Robinson, he's the main gunner on one side, and Ryan Smith's the main gunner on the other. And then they also have Justin Evans, the rookie that they drafted in the second round, somewhere in between there. And all three of those guys, they're fantastic. They're fantastic at punt coverage. So they're pretty beastly. This Bucs punt team, this Bucs coverage team, not only from Anger's leg and where he can pinpoint the punts, but also how good the punt return team the punt coverage team has been over the last year. They have proven to be one of the top units in the league. So that's definitely a strength for them.
Score prediction for the game.
I'm going to say, all right, who's playing quarterback?
Fair. I'll give you two score predictions, one for Keenum, one for Bradford.
Okay. If it is Keenum, I think that it will be 24-17 Bucs. And if it is Bradford, I will say that it will be 21-24 Bucs.
That's the difference? 4 points?
Yeah. Vegas hates me.
Okay. So, we always put our score predictions out there too. I don't think we've ever double checked them in the history of Norse Code, so who knows how good we are at this. But
you only check them if you're right.
Yeah.
Like last week, before the Bears game, I predicted that it was going to be 31-10 Tampa, and it ended up being 29-7 Tampa. And I remember you bet your butt that I went right back to that article and the crap out of it the second the game ended. I'm never going to be that right again on a final score.
For me, if it's Keenum, I'm assuming some sort of turnover that's going to lead either to a score or to really great field position. So I think the Bucs score more if Keenum's there too. So they are going to be different on both ends. So for me, I think if it's Keenum, I think the Bucs score 28.
Okay.
Welp. And the Vikings are limited to 17. The other way around, if it's Bradford, I think it is a close game, but I think it's 24-20 Vikings.
Okay. All right. That's fair. That's very fair.
That's a 15-point swing. I think that might be a little. I think I overcorrected for yours, but whatever.
I mean, I think in reality, if Keenum starts, it's going to be 45-7.
Right, but right. Keenum's the buck killer, man. Even Gerald McCoy knows it.
Yep, he truly does.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Sorry for the weirdness getting this set up, but loved having you on, man.
Yeah, no, I totally enjoyed it. This is great.
All right, sweet. So that was Trevor Sikkema at pewterreport.com. Check out his work. He writes great stuff. He's also a good friend of mine. We talk all the time, so his stuff is super good. We'll probably also have him on at some point in the offseason to talk about draft prospects. Trevor, you got anything you want to plug?
No, I mean, just follow me on Twitter at Tampa Bay Trey, TRE. I'm always talking football and all kinds of tomfoolery. And then,
evangelism, right?
That's, absolutely. Yeah. Very, very much a disciple of that. Team No Queso, by the way. But yeah, just add pewterreport.com. So
all right, sweet. Thanks so much.
Trevor Sikkema, everybody. Please check out his work. Should we mailbag?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that a thing that usually happens on the show? I struggle with the mailbag sometimes.
Don't we all?
Sheldon Hofer at Hofer_Sheldon on Twitter writes in, should we just forget about the Pittsburgh game since Bradford didn't play, or does it concern you?
I think we can pick up elements from the Pittsburgh game and evaluate them kind of independent of quarterback play. So, obviously I think the offense is better than what had happened in the game, in part because Bradford manages the pocket better and in part because Bradford is better at throwing a football than Case Keenum is. So, that's fine. You can kind of exclude that. But, there are still worries about the offensive line. That was a pretty decent but not the best defensive line in the league. And for them to perform like that, that's worrisome going forward, especially with the interior play, and especially Nick Easton. So, that's going to be a problem, especially coming up against Gerald McCoy in this Bucs game. Beyond that, the penalty problem, that needs to be resolved. I don't think that's a long-term problem. That's obviously not related to Bradford or Keenum, but regardless, I think that's going to be resolved, in part because the Vikings have been very, very good about not drawing penalties in the Mike Zimmer era.
Okay, let me slow you down right there for a second. I feel like we're talking about the two penalties, both on Xavier Rhodes, that led to 2 touchdowns. I mean, we basically gave them half the field twice. And
there's only one penalty on Xavier Rhodes. There's one on Trey Waynes, one on Terrence Newman. The Waynes one was declined because it ended up being a completion anyway.
So the Newman penalty struck me as that's a questionable call, but the Rhodes penalty, it seemed to me like he was putting himself too far out there. I mean, he wasn't even looking back at the ball, and he was functionally swimming Antonio Brown.
Yeah, no, I think. Well, I mean, the Rhodes penalty. I mean, I think he got called for pulling the jersey, not what he did at the end, although I could see that. But I think it's what happened during the route that he ended up getting, because it was holding, not defensive pass interference. I think.
No, it was DPI.
No, it was DPI. No, you're right. I'm wrong. Yeah. But yeah. So, but he did still end up tugging on the jersey, but it ended up being DPI. Yeah. I'm worried about the penalties because, there were 14 of them in the game, 11 of them accepted. So, and a couple of them were really big. I mean, it wasn't just the Rhodes penalty that put them into scoring position or the Newman penalty, which I agree, wasn't, the most clear cut of calls. But, there was the Brian Robinson penalty. That's probably not going to happen again, but it's really frustrating when it does happen. There was a couple of offensive penalties. I mean, The OPI on Diggs, yeah, that one's questionable too. But I think if you took away all the questionable calls, it's still like 8 penalties, and that's still a problem. And I think the Waynes and Newman penalties, and I think the Waynes penalty is maybe the least, but besides the offensive pass interference penalty on Diggs, I think the Waynes penalty was like the one that most likely wouldn't be called a penalty in another game. That still leaves 13 other penalties to be worried about. And I think some of them occurred as a result of overcoming like a lack of talent or ability in some cases. Like I think, the Rhodes penalty was a result of Antonio Brown beating him. That's not going to happen a lot, and it ended up not happening for the rest of the game.
Yeah,
But, Newman,
Rhodes
that'll
did a
happen.
remarkable
Waynes,
job
that'll
of
happen.
shutting him down, aside from the part where he just like gifted them 60 yards.
Yeah, right. He in one-on-one coverage, he held Brown to like 23 yards. And, of course, Brown ended up getting 62 yards for the game, which is still much lower than his 104 average over the past 3 years. But, you throw in the other 60 he gets off the DPI, and then you kind of back to where you were. But, yeah, I'm worried about the penalties a little bit, but I do think that they'll resolve themselves. I mean, because there were a lot of penalties. I mean, the special teams one is kind of hard to explain, and I think Rondé Barber didn't do a very good job of explaining what the actual penalty was. He thought it was 7 on the line of scrimmage on one side, and it wasn't, even though the thing counted. There was a player that was a shade over the long snapper, which that actually is infuriating to me, because if you're a player whose job it is to try to line up over the left or right guard on special teams and kickoff coverage, then you should know just instinctively that you cannot line up even one shoulder over the long snapper that's going to be called. And a lot of people are like, oh, the Vikings lined up in identical formations on the 2 separate field goals, and they didn't, because you take a look at Nick Easton, he's actually lined up just like 6 inches to the left on the second one, which is why it's not a penalty. That's dumb. I don't understand like how you can commit that kind of penalty if you're consistently on the kickoff block unit. So yeah, that's bothersome, and that will need to be addressed. But that's something to think about going forward, because that has nothing to do with Bradford Keenum. So yeah, there's some elements of the game to draw from and think about and analyze critically. And there are some elements of the game that don't have a long-term bearing on how the Vikings perform. I think Thielen and Diggs, I think they both had good games, especially because I don't think that penalty on Diggs mattered. Treadwell produced, which is good, because that's kind of an open question at this point. And the running game looked really good. So those are things that you can take going forward. And then if you assume it's Bradford instead of Keenum, I think some of those pressures aren't as impactful if it's Bradford, because Keenum played like a backup quarterback, right? One of the worst in the league against pressure. Like a passer rating, I think his career passer rating against pressure is something like 38. So it's better if he just kind of throws an incompletion every time.
It's like he didn't understand the sidelines exist. It's like his default move is just to run straight backward. Like that's...
Yeah. You couldn't step up into the pocket, and he didn't know how to throw away the ball, and Bradford can overcome those problems. And so the offensive line issue in that game is not going to be as big of a problem going forward. But it's not as if Riley Reif didn't get beat 4 times. It's not as if Nick Easton didn't get beat 5 times. It's not as if Mike Remmers didn't get beat 4 times, etc. So yeah, that's a concern, but it's going to be less of a concern with Bradford than with Keenum.
All right, Justin King writes in from Twitter. Has Aviante Collins gotten cut yet?
Nope, it's baffling. It's not good.
I don't know, is he too short for the guillotine to fully, like, did he just get a haircut and not the full head off?
That might be it. He's so small for a tackle. I'm so confused. I think he can only play center. It's just baffling to me that he's playing tackle.
Don from Ohio writes in, is it possible for someone to have the 3rd lowest point total in a week in their fantasy football league and still win? Asking for a friend.
Yeah, I guess it's possible. Can't imagine a scenario where that would happen, though.
Well, I can.
Bully for you, Dusty.
I feel like the secret is to be playing against Arif in the Norse Code League.
Oh my god!
And then,
I'm
no matter how few points
so
you score, you will somehow win.
I'm doing really well this week so far. I'm gonna make up for it.
Alex Goebel writes in, should we be at all worried about an O.J. Howard breakout game?
Yeah, I think so. I asked Trevor this a little bit in the, sort of this in the interview. And, the Bucs like to be in 2 tight end sets because they've got a talented tight end in Cameron Brayton. They've got a first-round pick in O.J. Howard, who's an athletic superstar, and he only got targeted 3 times in the last game. But like Trevor mentioned, he got targeted. The first target of the game was to him. So he's clearly in the game script as a receiving, as having receiving potential. And I think the game plan will kind of dictate whether or not he has the ability to break out as a receiver in any particular game. And if you end up in a situation where it's going to be Anthony Barr and Ben Gideon in coverage, both of them have their weaknesses in coverage. Barr's is more technical and Gideon's is more athletic. Both of those will be problems against either Braid or Howard. So I think there is some worry about a Howard breakout game. I would think that the primary option for the Bucs, until proven otherwise, is going to be Deshaun Jackson, because I think the fair presumption is going to be he's lined up against Trey Waynes. But maybe option number 2 or 3 could end up being one of those 2 tight ends. Yeah.
On that note, Jason Brown writes in, which Vikings big man could hold his own in a dance contest versus Gerald McCoy?
I suspect Linval Joseph. I think he's a dancing man. If not, it's always obviously Everson. But I want as big a man as possible pulling out these dance moves, and I think Linval can do it.
All right, Kyle Slaby writes in, what's the best beer to use to boil brats?
I think there's a better answer for you, mostly because I don't boil brats in beer. I just grill them.
I think you just answered the question.
It's weird to me because I think that you want to have the Maillard reaction on the outside. You're boiling in beer, you don't get that.
Yeah, and you can pre-boil brats before you put them on the grill, but that kind of misses the point. If you want to use beer in service of brats, grill them, and then find the thickest, maltiest stout beer you can, pour it in a saucepan, and reduce it until it's thick and sticky, and then pour it on top of your grilled brats.
Sounds delicious.
It doesn't suck. Hayden writes in, why is Arif just so much better than everybody else?
I don't know, man. It's probably inherent talent. Not a ton of work. It's a weird question for you to lob at me. I thought you'd cut that one out.
A fake Renaya Tuisasopo writes in, is Devin Omar Shadu a good option in fantasy versus the Bucs? I mean, no. No.
Pick him up in all your leagues. Is he even in the player list of Yahoo or ESPN leagues? That'd be interesting to find out.
I'm going to go with Yahoo, yes. ESPN, no.
All right. Pick him up in all your Yahoo leagues.
I think that's it.
Weak mailbag, man.
Yeah.
Guys, we need more better questions from you.
It's been a hurdy week.
That's true.
I think I'm actually grateful we didn't get a bunch of when is Teddy ready questions. I think that would have been the worst possible outcome. So what about Teddy? How's his knee? Well, ask his doctor or the team, but the team is notoriously unwilling to talk about it. They don't even talk about Sam Bradford's knee. Don't even get started on Teddy's knee.
Right.
All right. Is there a thing or two that you would like to plug in advance of the weekend's games?
Yeah, sure. So I've got my piece up on Dalvin Cook on zonecoverage.com. That seems to be fairly popular. People seem to like it, so definitely check that out. Besides that, I'm going to write a piece either on, sort of Trey Waynes and whether or not that's a salvageable situation, or on Mike Evans, or on Gerald McCoy. I still haven't decided yet. I'm a bad writer. But that's going to be upcoming at zonecoverage.com.
So please be sure to check out Arif's work at zonecoverage.com, and Trevor Sikkema at Tampa Bay Trey. And what's the Pewter thing?
PewterReport.com.
PewterReport.com. And that's pewter like the metal, not the river. For those who go, that's like a southern thing. Whatever. Like anyone from the South listens to a Minnesota Vikings podcast. Ugh.
Yeah, I think we do have a couple listeners from the South, man.
I know that was...
Check the state by state, man.
Joke. But that's...
Yeah.
Maybe reaching too far. But that's what we do on Norse Code. Because here we demand excellence. And you should too. You should demand excellence. And demand Norse Code. And we'll see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.